Demarcus Cousins last season was traded to the New Orleans Pelicans in a deal that shocked the NBA. After that trade, the Pelicans didn't win much with Cousins due to the lack of talent on the roster outside of AD and Boogie. The offseason acquisitions of Rondo and Ian Clark were decent, but far from game-changing, and the perimeter talent on the Pelicans overall just isn't good enough to complement Cousins and AD. And as a result, they can only be so good, and DeMarcus Cousins is an impending free agent. Now, if there weren't a lot of teams that could accommodate Cousins, that would be one thing. But there are. There are 3 teams that I think have a serious shot outside of the Pelicans that I think would be able to lure Cousins out of New Orleans. And I'm going to list off these teams in the order of likeliness that I think it is for them to sign Boogie. First, the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder already have a solid core of Westbrook and Paul George. Westbrook is the best point guard in the NBA, and Paul George is still a top 15 player despite his horrific injury from a few years ago. And I think DeMarcus Cousins would play great with these two. I have always thought that the whole Westbrook-KD thing wasn't a good fit. Durant loves having the ball and isolating, and with last year's usage rate, we know how much Russ likes to have the ball. But PG is a very capable off-ball shooter who, yes, had the ball in his hands a lot with the Pacers, but I expect him to handle the ball very little when Westbrook is actually playing with him. And DeMarcus Cousins can play off of this. The only time he really has the ball for a long time is in the post, but he's been posting up less and less as his career has progressed. He can shoot, he can cut inside, and of course play in the pick and roll. But I don't think this would work out for a few reasons. First, the Thunder would have to trade both Steven Adams and Enes Kanter to have the salary to pay for both Boogie and PG-13, removing roughly $42 million in cap, and I would probably consider including Andre Roberson to the deal to get $10 million more off of the books. Teams that would have interest in Adams would be the Suns, who need a center and have cap space, or the Atlanta Hawks, who could use Adams for their foundation pieces for the future. And perhaps they could move Kanter in a sign-and-trade with the Pelicans, but the likelihood of any of that happening is very minimal. Adams would definitely have a lot of trade value, but few teams have the cap space for his $24 million contract, and they would have to include another high-salary player. And Kanter, he is a really good role player, but I wouldn't trade for a good role player making $18 million a season. So, as exciting as that big 3 would be, the Thunder would have to jump through a lot of hoops to make it happen. Next, the Washington Wizards. This idea has existed for a while. John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins were teammates in Kentucky, and they haven't been too subtle about how much they want to play together again. Do I really need to explain how awesome this would be? If you've been around my channel for a bit, you know how I feel about John Wall. And a DeMarcus Cousins-John Wall pick and roll would be impossible to guard. Wall could pull up for a mid-range jumper, which he's amazing at. John could attack the basket with his insane speed. He could dish it to DeMarcus on the roll for a dunk, or kick it to him for a pick and pop. If you stopped Boogie from getting to the rim off of the pick, he could still bully you down low in the post. And God forbid that there's a switch onto a point guard. That's some barbecue chicken. And even if the big stops the post up, John could cut backdoor for a pass because Boogie is a phenomenal passer, and Cousins or Wall could pass it to Otto Porter, who shot over 40% from 3 this season, or Bradley Beal, who we all know is knockdown. Okay, I think that was like the biggest basketball nerd moment that I've ever had. But still, a Wizards offense with Boogie thrown into the mix would be unguardable. The problem would again be salary, but I don't think it would be as big of a problem for the Wiz. They would have to move Otto Porter Jr., which kind of defeats the purpose of me mentioning him as a shooter in the first place, and they would need to move Marcin Gortat or Ian Mahinmi. Again, I would see a sign-and-trade where the Pelicans get Porter and Mahinmi, and the Wiz get Cousins. And they would have to hope by the 2019 season that Kelly Oubre will be good enough to start at small forward, and they could have Marcin Gortat off of the bench, who is a very average starter, but he would be amazing as a bench player. This is plausible, and I would love to see this happen because if LeBron leaves the Cavs, I think this Wizards team could go to the finals for a few years. They would still lose to the Warriors or LeBron and the Spurs if that happens, but still, would provide for some great basketball. And finally, the most realistic team I see Boogie heading to is the Houston Rockets. Cap isn't nearly as big of a problem. If they trade for Melo, they will 100% be including Ryan Anderson and probably Eric Gordon as well. So that deal shouldn't really change the salary much. And then all they have to do is re-sign Chris Paul, and I don't think he'll be making much more than 20 mil. And I imagine he, of all people, would be willing to take a pay cut to win at this point in his career. And they would have to move PJ Tucker so they would have a decent amount of salary. I would do the math for how much, but meh. And of course, I think the Rockets would be happy to make this happen because we know that the Rockets are going all in to compete with the Warriors. And I could basically say the same thing about Harden and Boogie as I did with Wall and Boogie, and that's including Chris Paul. And this move would also mean that they would have to let Clint Capella walk in free agency. The Rockets could go into the 2018-19 season with a starting lineup of Chris Paul, James Harden, Carmelo Anthony, Nene I guess, and Demarcus Cousins. That team could compete with the Warriors. The only problem in these potential options is clearing cap space, but the ability to move that cap space is easier for some teams rather than others. And quick thing here, I'm a huge fan of SDC, and one of my favorite things that he does is have a question of the day. He still hasn't featured one of my comments, so maybe I don't like him that much, but I want to start doing a question of the day myself. So today's question of the day, I want to know, where do you think Demarcus Cousins will end up next season and why? That's the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.
I dare you play your cards, boy, you bet I'm a trendsetter too. Fire when the strobe hits you.
That's it, Brian?